Many of us have had some building work done in our houses in the past, and that could have involved having ceilings replastered, walls replastered, extensions put on, for example. And this particular extension here, if the camera can pick it up, they've had this lovely roof lantern fitted, which means they've had to have the ceiling thoroughly replastered. And that was done about a month or two ago, so you can see that the plaster, which was once a very dark pink, has now dried out to a very pale pink with no dark patches on it anymore. It's very important that when you're repainting over new plaster that you do let it thoroughly dry out so that the paint can really bond to the surface. So this one is definitely dry enough now for repainting. So I'll be getting on with this shortly. When it comes to preparing new plaster, the good news is, if it's been done professionally, you shouldn't really need to do a lot of preparation work. So you won't need to get sandpaper and go crazy and rub the whole surface down. That's not really required. So all you really need to do, first of all, is to get a normal scraper and just look around, see if there's any little bits or nibs on the surface of the walls or ceilings, and then just give them a very light scrape just to knock the nibs off. And there's not much on here, so that's good news. The only time you might need to use an abrasive paper is on internal corners, and if you do need to use it, the best thing to use would be in either a 120 or 180 grade abrasive paper. Nothing too coarse because it will scratch up the plaster. So like I say, on these internal corners, sometimes you do get some little bits of plaster down these edges that do just need a light rub. So and that's all it really needs, unless there's a big ridge and you want to rub it a little bit harder. So preparation wise then, just a little go around with the scraping up any nibs off, a lighter braid in the internal corners, dust it all down with a soft brush, and then you should be ready for painting. Hi, well the paint I'm going to be using on the new plaster is this. It's called Contract Matte Emulsion. Now this paint is widely used in the industry for applying to new plaster. It's actually designed mainly for that purpose. It does bond well to the surface, and it's what's known as a permeable paint, which means that the paint allows any trapped moisture in the surface to escape through the paint film. So they're also known in the industry as a breathable paint as well. You do need to thin them down for your first coat applied to new plaster, and then that is called a mist coat in the industry, or in parts of the UK they also call it a cut coat. Now what you need to do is you need to look on the instructions to see what the manufacturer recommends should be the water content when you mix it up to apply to a new plaster surface. And what you'll find is each manufacturer have got their own idea about how much water should be added to their paint. A lot of decorators I know would even thin it down to be sort of 50-50 paint and water to apply to a new plaster surface. But my advice to you would be to look on the actual instructions for the paint and see what the guidance says. For example, on this particular one, it says mix 1 part of water to 4 parts paint. So that's what I'll be doing. That's what I suggest you do. So if there's any problems, you can go back to where you bought the paint and tell them that you've done it correctly as the manufacturer says. What you shouldn't do is use a normal emulsion paint like this one on new plaster, because most normal emulsion paints contain a vinyl resin in the paint, or some other sort of resin, like latex for example, to make the paint more washable, more durable. The problem is, because it's got that vinyl ingredient in the paint, in the resin, it will then hold back any moisture in the surface, and what happens is eventually it could just bubble and peel off the surface. So you shouldn't really use a normal conventional matte vinyl emulsion on new plaster. And it is really important that you do thin it down first, the contract matte, before you apply it. If you put it on neat, unthinned onto the surface, what you find in the future, and this has happened to me many times, is you'll get your roller and you'll start to roll over the applied paint, which was done several years ago, and the paint comes off the surface and ends up sticking to your roller sleeve as you're rolling the surface. So you know darn well that those people didn't thin down and apply a mist coat first. So I'm going to need to thin down the paint before I start. One thing to be aware of is that there's a small number of paint manufacturers who state that their contract matte emulsion should not be thinned. So that's going to make it unsuitable to be used as a mist coat. So make sure that you check on the instructions for the product before you buy it. So when it comes to mixing up the paint for the mist coat, if you're pretty confident at doing this, you could just estimate the quantities you need. But if you're new to this and you think, oh crikey, I want to get this right, I don't want to mix up too much, the best thing to do would be to measure the surface you're going to paint and work that out, which I've already done. And I've calculated that that surface is about 18 metres squared. And the manufacturer says that 1 litre of their paint will cover 13 metres squared. So I'm going to need approximately 1.5 litres of paint to do the mist coat on the surface. So 1.5 litres of paint is 1,500 millilitres. Now I'm going to need 1 part of water and 4 parts of paint. So that's 5 parts in total. So if we've got 1,500 millilitres, divide it by the 5 and you get 300 millilitres. So I'm going to need 1 part of water, 300 millilitres, and 4 parts of paint, 1,200 millilitres. And what I've already done, I've got one of these paint kettles, and I've marked on the inside, using a measuring jug, where the 300 millilitre is and where the 1,500 millilitre is. So now I can safely mix up the paint in this paint kettle, and hopefully then I'll have the required amount of paint to mist coat the ceiling. If you've got to mix up larger quantities than what I have here, you could obviously mix up your paint using one of these buckets. And most of these buckets nowadays do have measurements down through the inside, but they're pretty hard to see, so I normally use an indelible pen just to mark on the inside so you can see the marks better. So you could use that for larger areas. Well, I've mixed up the paint here. As you can see, it's got a sort of a consistency like single cream when you've mixed it up. So now I'm all ready to start painting the ceiling. Okay, so I'll have a quick look at the equipment we're going to be used to apply the paint to the new plaster. I've got a couple of good quality synthetic filament brushes here. That's a Purdy one, which is very well renowned in the trade. That's a Pioneer one there, the 3-inch. So good quality synthetic filament brushes. And to apply the paint with the roller, I'm going to be using this particular roller sleeve. It's by a company called Hamilton, and it's a microfiber medium pile sleeve. I really like these ones. There's just individual fibres coming out of the roller which release the paint evenly onto the surface. And also when you've got to clean them out when you finish, they're a lot quicker to clean out because the paint can come out from between the fibres very easily. So yeah, 9-inch microfiber medium pile roller sleeve. And I'll be using one of these adjustable roller poles here because you can adjust them, pull them out to the height you want. It's got a thread on the end there which fits the thread in my roller arm, which goes on like that. But be careful because some of these roller arms don't have threads, so just double check if you're buying the equipment and make sure that yours does have the threads in it to enable it to go onto the pole. As far as roller trays are concerned, that's sort of a little DIY roller tray. The troubles with these is particularly when you mist coat them, they're not very deep. So when you're loading the roller up, it can slosh over the back of the roller tray. So I advise not to use one of these little trays like that. If you want to use a tray, which is probably what I'm going to do because it's just a small ceiling, I'll be using one of these much deeper trays like this. Okay, if you've got larger areas to do, what most decorators would do is use one of these called a paint scuttle. These aren't actually that dear. I bought one of these the other day. It's only about £5, so they're not very dear. These sort of things. That's a scuttle, ideal for larger areas. As with most of my videos, I'll put these on the links if you look in the description box. Okay, so now I'm all ready to get started with the painting. I haven't done any filling on the plaster surface at all yet, because what I normally do is apply a mist coat to the whole surface first, because that tends to show up any imperfections in the surface. If not, you do some filling, give it a coat, then you've got to fill it again. So I plan to give it a mist coat and then check to see if it needs any filler applied afterwards. So the first part of the scene I'm going to paint is around the inside of this roof lantern area here first. I'll be using my 3-inch brush. So about 2 centimetres of paint on the brush. Tap it in like that. It really does soak into that surface very rapidly, so that's good. As you can see, a brush full of paint doesn't go very far at all. It just gets absorbed straight into that surface. It's leaving that sort of misty look to it. That's where it gets its name from. But it's very easy to apply this mist coat. But it does go and soak straight into the surface. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest of this area just inside the roof lantern. I'll be back in a minute. Completed painting around the inside of the roof lantern area, if the camera can pick it up there. There we go, that all went pretty good. So now I'm going to paint around the perimeter of the ceiling now, including the coving, and go slightly onto the ceiling, ready for rolling. Okay, so again about 2 centimetres of paint. As you can see, this is very easy to apply because it's so thin, this mist coat. So I'm just going to go the width with the brush across the edge of the plaster there. That is because when I roll it, it won't be able to go right into that edge. So come slightly out of the width of the brush with a mist coat like that. So I'm going to continue round and do the rest of the coving edge of the ceiling. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've completed painting around the edge of the ceiling here. So what I need to do next, just paint around these surface mounted lights. And when I've done that, I'll be able to get on with the rolling. So I'm going to cut around these lights now. If you're not confident with cutting in, obviously you could use some of that frog tape. There we go, just about 100 more to do. I'll be finished. Okay, so I've completed cutting in around all the lights, as you can see. So now I'm ready to roll the remaining area on the ceiling there. When I do it, what I would normally do is work back from the window. So if that's the window in your room, paint the ceiling and come back away from the light. So I'm going to roll down through there and then work back over to that side of the room. What I've already done is I've already lined my deep roller tray with a black bag, so I can just wipe it out and throw the black bag away when I finish. So I haven't got to clean the tray out. So I've got my roller ready, I've adjusted it to the right height so I can gain access to the ceiling easier. So I just load up my roller. At this point, be very careful not to overload the roller, because the paint is very thin. Where we've thinned it down, we don't want it to go splashing all over the walls. There we go, that's that little section done to start off with. It's so much easier using these poles and being up a step ladder, using it by hand. Okay, so that's that section completed there now. So I'm going to carry on and roll down through there, back to the sides and along behind where the camera person is. And we'll have a look when it's finished. Well, that's the mist coat all completed now. As you can see as the camera pans around, that's got that sort of misty look to it where it gets its name. And paint-wise, it was worth doing those calculations, because if you look in a little kettle, there's only a little bit left. So I'm not wasting much paint, so that's brilliant. I've got to leave that paint now 2 to 4 hours to dry before I can do any more coats of paint or filling. Now I've noticed, now it's had a mist coat, that round in some areas there's some little indentations which now show up. So I'm going to let that paint dry, then I'll knock on a bit of filler and do a bit of filling. Yeah, so look at here, there are a few little imperfections in the surface here which I'm going to fill now. So I've mixed up some filler. If you've never mixed up poly filler before, I have done a video on this to show you how to do it. So get a little bit of filler on the knife. Bit there. Tiny one there. Bit there. Because I couldn't see all these before I applied the paint, so it is best to give it a coat of paint and then look at doing the filling. Not too bad there. 1 or 2 over there I have to do next. So I'm going to carry on and fill in these little bits of dents, then it'll be ready for the next coat of paint. Well, that's the ceiling all finished now. So the new plaster received one mist coat, which was the thinned down contract matte emulsion, and that was followed by 2 further coats of the contract matte emulsion, which was not thinned down, and it's made it really nice and white and bright, and really makes that roof lantern look really nice, I think, flooding the light down through. So I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, why not subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date with all my latest videos.